I tell them, I've been alone. I've been lost. Both are survivable. And surviving can become living again.
You know, if you ever needed to talk, I'm around.
I'm fine.
But first they have to accept help. For a crew of overachievers, that kind of vulnerability can be hard to hold.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Positively Trek Book Club, and an auspicious day here once again as we get to talk about a new Star Trek novel, which is something that hasn't happened very much recently. We had Strange New Worlds with John Jackson Miller, and now we get a Star Trek Discovery novel with Dayton Ward, and I'm really excited to talk about this one. And joining me to talk about it is Jessie Earl. Jessie, welcome back to Positively Trek.
I am so excited to be back. It's new Star Trek novel time, baby. I'm very pumped. It's always my favorite time of, hopefully several times of year, I should say.
Absolutely. Totally. Lately, yeah, not too many times a year, but let's hope that turns around. Mm-hmm. And because it's a new Star Trek novel, we always have to get the author themselves in to talk about it. So joining us is Dayton Ward. Welcome back to Positively Trek. So happy to have you here.
How are we all doing today? Thanks for having me.
Not too bad.
Doing great. Mm-hmm. It's a nice brisk Saturday morning, so it's great.
You know, staying inside, keeping out of the smoke to talk about Star Trek novels.
Oh, that's right. You're on that side of the world. I forgot about that. That's less fun. As someone who has lived in California for a very long time in Seattle right now, I feel your pain. Not at the moment, thankfully, but I feel your pain.
Yeah, so, and we're sending a lot of that down south. So, Dayton, I'm not sure where you're at, but hopefully you're not getting too much Canadian wildfire smoke where you are.
I think it's where are the fires originating?
Right now, we had a whole bunch up here in Alberta, but right now there's a lot kind of in the Quebec, Ontario region. And
I think because of the way the jet stream works and the weather patterns work, we've missed the bulk of it because it's bypassing us on its way to the East Coast. I'm in the Midwest. So, I mean, there were a couple of days where we thought we got a little whiff of it, you know, and you could smell it in the air, but it wasn't anything like the pictures you saw from New York the other day, like the whole Blade Runner mystique or, thing they got going on there.
No, you know what our world's going to be looking like for the next 20 years. Yeah. It's great. I love it. It's totally fantastic.
I say everybody should probably look at this as a preview because that's the way the world's going. But don't believe me or science. Just go right.
I have already settled on an understanding that to get to the Star Trek world, we have to go through World War III. Pike made a whole speech about it. I've come to accept this fact, and then we'll have our endless, transporters and replicators. It's coming. I'll get there.
Well, as a Canadian, I would be remiss if I didn't say sorry.
It's Dan's fault. Dan did this.
Was it you, Dan?
It was not.
We told you not to do it, but you wanted those s'mores, didn't you? It's all your fault.
I tell you, oh man, the rage that, sorry, this is total tangent, but the rage that fills my body when I'm driving on the road and I see somebody flick a cigarette butt out right now. I'm just I just about explode. It's not good. Speaking of strong feelings and impacts on mental health, I'm really excited to talk about this Star Trek Discovery novel, Somewhere to Belong. And let's get right into it because, first of all, as we've said a few times, not a lot of new Star Trek novels this year. So when we get it, it's just so exciting. And dealing with some of my favorite things with this new Star Trek show that's been around for a few years now. And this new environment that the crew of Discovery find themselves in. So the 32nd century, kind of this Wild West open environment that we haven't had a lot to do with in Star Trek. What was that like, first of all, to kind of get to write in that environment?
It was a little intimidating at first, but I suppose, I've been doing this long enough where it doesn't take that long to snap in. And I've been watching the show since the beginning, so it's not like I'm unfamiliar with the material. But my biggest challenge for it was this is the first time that I'd written a book where the show was still in active production. At least it was at the time I was writing the book and plotting the book. In fact, I was finished, months before there was an announcement about season 5 being it for Discovery. I was already pretty much done with my work. In fact, this book was supposed to come out back in the fall of 2022, but supply chain issues and printer availability issues and all that paper issues pushed it into 2023. So I sat here and then the announcement came out that the show was wrapping, and I'm like, well, okay then. But at the time, that was the first time that I'd written a book where the show was in active production, and I had immediate feedback from somebody working on the show, to make sure I wasn't stepping on any toes or respect anything. Kirsten Beyer, of course, was her usual wise counsel throughout the process. Well, that was the biggest challenge. As far as the setting and the technology, I mean, it's basically like switching gears between original series and Next Generation era, or it's just you got to remember the technology works differently in this new era. That was also a learning curve because I would snap, or I'd find myself getting tripped up by muscle memory, I call it, where, touch the comm badge or, pull out his tricorder from their holster or whatever. And I'm like, wait a minute, it all works differently now. And, and then I felt obligated to describe how this technology works because we see it in the show, but they really don't spend a lot of time on it. They just go with it and expect that the viewers will catch up. This thing has to make sense, on the page.
I was going to say, I really enjoyed those sections of the book where there was just like you stop and just talk about like the characters being like, wow, this is programmable matter is a whole different thing. And I enjoyed learning all about the nitty gritty of that. It was a good time.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I'm trying to get too buried in the tech, but it was like, remembering, okay, there's swiping screens that are, holographic screens in front of them, or there's swiping screens that pop out of their comm badge. Or I joked on another interview, it's like, you can transport wherever you want now at will, pretty much. So that eliminates the necessity of let's have a conversation in the hallway on our way to the transporter room. You have to come up with another reason for these people to get together and talk about something so that you can push the narrative forward. That's what those conversations used to be. It's like, the West Wing with their walk and talks, and they get all the exposition dumped at you while you're running through the hallways. And Trek did that to a degree here and there, but you don't really have a need for that anymore. So, or at least not all the time. So, I had to get creative with a couple of things, remember the technology and, how it could be useful and a hindrance. And then, of course, because you're writing a book and you have bad guys that are trying to defeat your good guys, you have to come up with ways to defeat that technology, that you didn't have before. So it's, that's just the writer's life.
It feels still like, I remember it's still like a ever-present Star Trek problem though, isn't it? It's like you have to figure out ways to like make the Enterprise not be at full power so you can do stuff you want to do with the story.
The transporters have to be inhibited somehow, or the shields have to go down, or Data has to take a nap, or something.
Exactly.
Totally. It kind of strikes me a little bit that like one of the joys of reading Star Trek novels in the early days was you had this show that, gave you kind of a gloss over of what the universe is like. And it was the writers, the novelists that really dug into that and showed a lot of that world building and stuff. And in this brand new era, you're kind of on the forefront of that. So I'm feeling like a lot of those 80s novels where we, learn about the message board system on the Enterprise and the alien crew members we never get to see and stuff. You're kind of doing that for the Discovery era here because, 13 episodes, 10 episodes a season, there's not a lot of room to kind of really deep dive into that like you can in a novel.
Yeah, that's always, it's also fun because we have the opportunity to do that. You just have to be careful not to get bogged down in it at all. Yeah. So, I don't want to be like Tom Clancy either, where I spend, 6 pages describing to you the cycle of operation of an M16 rifle. And that's not what you all checked in to read about. But it's important to understand where a phaser comes from in the 32nd century because it's not hung on their hip like in the old days. So it's like, there's that pendant on their sleeve. And if you flick your wrist and you make the motion, here comes a phaser. So you have to kind of explain that at least the first time or two, and then off you go. So hopefully people will follow along. And then, there's not too many instances of people reading a Star Trek novel and they've never watched the show. Mm-hmm. So you take it on faith that they understand the basic operations of the different technology and they know where things are generally speaking on the ship or on the bridge, that kind of thing. So, you don't have to necessarily describe everything, but I try to populate a little bit just so you can get an idea of where characters are or what they're playing with or who they're with or what's around them, just enough to paint that mental picture, and then off we go.
Well, a couple other things I just want to talk about with regards to the novel before we get into spoilers, because I'll give a warning to our listeners that we're going to get into the spoilers for the plot and stuff. One other thing I thought about when you're writing in this time period is it's kind of cool because you can use the entirety of Star Trek history up to that point, right? There's so many things you can kind of play with. But then it also occurred to me that there's probably a big challenge in that because some of that is still being written right now in the 25th century or 24th with various other shows going on. What kind of challenges did that present?
I had to kind of step softly. Was my, I don't want to say mandate, but it was the counsel that I received from Kirsten. It's like, don't dig too far into the parts that were skipped over that we haven't defined yet, because again, at that time, we weren't sure. All it would take is one line of dialogue to erase anything I set up in the book. So you have to always, you don't want your book to be invalidated within seconds of it coming out of the box at the bookstore. You want to give it a little chance to breathe. So I just was sort of wary about it laying down any hard facts or hard dates or anything like that could be overwritten by the show. So I was careful. And that still leaves a lot to play with, because Discovery, missed out on the rest of the 23rd century and the entire 24th century, which is pretty well mapped at this point, thanks to all the shows. And so I had plenty of ammunition, so to speak, to work with, as we will talk about, I'm sure, as we get into this storyline.
Yeah, I did find it fun. Without getting to spoilers yet, there's that one bit where you're sort of describing the history of one of the alien species we're dealing with, and it's like, here's stuff that happened to the rest of them in 23rd century. Here's stuff that drove into like Star Trek Dominion War and Picard stuff, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happened in between, and then we're here today. It was a kind of a fun little and yada yada yada, but it was all careful, and it made sense. Yeah, it
was the Seinfeld bit. Yada 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 over it.
Exactly. One question that I wanted to ask while we were in the spoiler-free section was, one of the things that I liked most about this novel in particular is it's the first Discovery novel that feels like it could have been a missed episode of the show, and actually gets to be kind of like a solo episode of the show, as opposed to one that like fits into the overall story arc. I've loved all the other Star Trek Discovery novels by all the other authors, and they've been great. But they've all been like backstories, or like had to like fit in weird little holes in the story. And this one, while it is set between seasons 3 and 4, it feels like, oh, this could have been an episode of the show that didn't have to fit into a large continuity arc as well. Which so I was wondering how you sort of went about thinking about that.
You hit on exactly what I wanted to do when they asked me if I wanted to do a Discovery novel. I said, can I do a traditional Star Trek story that's a one and done kind of thing? And it's something that this particular series has not had, except for just a couple of episodes here and there throughout its run. Most of its stories impact the larger narrative that's driving that season. You can point to a couple that are largely standalone and they would work as standalone episodes, but yet they're still driven by the overarching season narrative. And I wanted to just do a traditional Star Trek story with the crew finding a problem and hopefully leaving it better than they found it. Not necessarily answering all the questions or curing all the problems, but at least having had a positive impact on the people they meet. That was my overriding request when I was asked to write the book. And then they asked that it be set between seasons 3 and 4. And that's when I knew I would have a lot of character material to work with, because of the way things were left at the end of season 3 and yet seemingly resolved by the beginning of season 4. Like, wait a minute, how did that question get answered? How did that problem get resolved? How did those feelings get mended? That kind of thing. So I had a lot to work with. Thanks. And Kirsten is the one that helped kind of let me explore those areas.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And a lot of my questions going forward with regards to this novel are going to be about a lot of those kind of plot points and things that you picked up on between season 3 and 4. So I feel like that would have been an interesting time to set a story. And I remember when season 4 started kind of thinking like, we missed something here. So this kind of scratches a lot of those itches. I really appreciate that.
It was a target-rich environment. There were a lot of questions about between character relationships and dynamics, and questions about, career choices and life choices and second guessing. And did I make the right choice by coming with the crew? to the future. There was just a lot of that left on the table. And then by the time season 4 rolls around, they're running like they've been there their whole lives. So I'm like, wait a minute, hang on. Point of order. We have questions to answer before we do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for downloading this episode of Positively Trek. We truly do appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and I'd like to especially thank our Patreon supporters. Thank you to our Constitution class supporters, Jim Stoffel, Joyce Marin, and Paul D. Kinnear. If you'd like to become a supporter of Positively Trek and join our crew, please go to patreon.com/positivelytrek. You can get early access to episodes, exclusive content, shoutouts, associate producer credits, ad-free episodes, and more. Again, that's patreon.com/positivelytrek. Thank you all, and live long and prosper. Well, I think that's probably a good point to jump into the spoiler-filled discussion here, because let's jump right into that with mental health and the character of Dr. Arbasala, who I'm guessing I'm getting that pronunciation somewhat close.
Close enough.
It's what they said in the audiobook, or very close to.
So
it sounded like you nailed it. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, a Denobulan character, which I always love. You know, I'm flashing back to Dr. Phlox and Dr. Trop from the relaunch novels and stuff. Love a Denobulan. He's this visiting mental health professional who's helping the Discovery crew deal with a lot of this trauma that they've experienced from, or wanting to assess the Discovery crew basically and see how they're adjusting. And I really appreciated that because, like you said, season 4 started and they're fine. They're operating in the 32nd century. No big deal. Again, you know, only 13 episodes per season or however many. You can't really delve deep into a lot of these things. So what was that like, getting to kind of play with that, the meat of that, getting into the heads of these characters and imagining what it would be like to leave your lives 1,000 years in the past?
It was like Christmas morning when I found out I was going to have this area. I mean, there's I don't know if they actually come out and say how much time has elapsed between the two seasons, but I was able to figure out that it's a few months. So there's room for stories like this, which is, you know, in the show, that's the first time that's happened, is between seasons 3 and 4. I mean, 1 and 2 are almost right on top of each other, within seconds of each other. And then, you know, season 3 starts off kind of that way because, you know, Burnham arrives first and she's there for a year. And then the second episode, Discovery shows up. But to them, that happened immediately. From their subjective points of view, no time passed between the end of season 2 and season 3. So for each of the characters, all they had was those few moments here and there to sort of play lip service to adapting to their current circumstances before they were thrown into the storyline of the season. And even the characters themselves acknowledge that. Even Admiral Vance acknowledges that, you know, he doesn't have the luxury of giving them the time they need to adapt at the moment. So you think they had to do it between seasons 3 and 4. They had to do it after the immediate crisis was solved, and they give them some much deserved downtime. So that to me was my starting point. All these other questions were left on the table. Like, you know, Stamets is very angry with Burnham at the end of this season, and Tilly is very uncertain about what she wants to do. And even Burnham is kind of not 100% sure she's ready to be the captain just under these set of circumstances, you know, because she spent that year remaking her life and maybe she wants to go back to that. So there's a lot to play with from a character point of view. This is, you know, great stuff if you're a tie-in writer. And then there's just, you know, where does Discovery and its crew fit into this new dynamic? You know, with this, you know, now we know what caused the burn. We know it can't happen again in theory, but yet there's still a lot of rebuilding to be done. There are relationships to be mended. And Discovery is obviously a very important part of that formula. But at the same time, the Admiral is conscious that he can't burn these people out. You know, they're a very special crew, and they obviously have a unique set of skills and a unique perspective. He can't run them into the ground. So this is that pause between the two adventures between season 3 and 4, where we kind of take stock of our characters' mental well-being and their how are they faring under their new circumstances? Are they happy where they are? Are they despondent? Are they missing friends and family back home? All those answers are yes, you know, and no, depending on the situation. So it was fun to bring in an outside character in the form of Dr. Arbasala. to sort of help them navigate those questions. And I'm going to say, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not trained in mental health. I have no certifications or qualifications to discuss this intelligently. So I was very conscious of being sensitive on the topic the entire way. I spoke with some people who do have expertise in those fields to try to help. How would somebody do this? And how can I relay this to a layperson without bogging it down in a lot of, technical information or, professional information? How can I make it personal for the crew members, and how can I make it unique to the individual crew members that I chose to spotlight with this part of the storyline? So that was a challenge.
One kind of minor thing that I wanted to bring up as well, just as a fan reading this, is you briefly mentioned the gray uniforms at the end of season 3. And for half a second in my brain, I was like, oh man, I have to imagine those uniforms this entire book. And then you very quickly, but now we've got these bright new uniforms. I was like, oh, thank you, Dayton. Thank you very much. That did a lot for my mental health reading this.
Speaking as a viewer, I hated those gray uniforms. I hate those. They are horrible looking. And
I'll make this argument. They look great on Admiral Vance, especially on the stark white of the main Starfleet base in season 3. Everywhere else, they look horrible.
Mm-hmm. I rationalized it in my head that those are probably, or could be, their dress uniforms, or uniforms for more formal occasions and the kind of stuff you would wear in the presence of the admiral at Starfleet headquarters. It's like, when you work at the White House or the Pentagon or somebody high up in the chain, you wear your fancy uniform. If you're busy working for a living, then you have, more professional attire that gets the job done, which is where the uniforms that you see in season 4 come in. So yeah, I hated those gray things. I thought they were horrible. So yes, I was happy to quickly move them aside, and move and get everybody into, plus, the colors. You got to have the colors, man. You got to have the, got to have the blue and the gray and the red and the yellow. It's not Star Trek if there's not division colors prominently displayed. So maybe Enterprise to a degree, because they were before all that. They get a break, but even they were playing the game,
And they had the blue too. It was blue. It was poppy. It wasn't just gray and drab,
Actually, confession, I thought the Enterprise uniforms were pretty cool.
I like those because those were based on NASA. And it was a good middle ground between Star Trek and NASA stuff. So
I thought they were the most practical of the uniforms. Like, oh my God, they have pockets.
Yeah.
How amazing.
Totally.
Yes.
Women everywhere, rejoice. There are pockets, So it's like, yeah.
Except for T'Pol, she still couldn't have pockets.
Yeah, I don't know.
Welcome to Star Trek. Every woman has to wear the skin tight uniform.
But as a military guy, I'm thinking you don't wear the same duds to the office that you do to the field. You change your uniform. You put on more practical clothes, and so it always used to rub me the wrong way. But that's that's every show ever.
And since before we get into the meat of the plot of this story, I did like a lot of the first part of this book, which was kind of the characters just getting to exist at Starfleet headquarters. And figuring out what that everyday life would be like now that they're living there. So I remember you talking about Culber and Stamets were going to go and have dinner on the starbase and figuring out it was an interesting thing that again, Star Trek even in general doesn't sometimes get into this, but especially this modern Star Trek shows where everything's sort of moving fast. You don't really get to see these moments of casualness among the crew. And so I did really enjoy those early beats throughout the novel where we did just get to see them relaxing and what their everyday life was like. And sort of curious how you sort of thought about trying to envision that within a 32nd century sort of mode.
Well, I just imagine, what do these people do for fun? What do the people who are stuck on this space station, they have to do something, to get their minds off there. They can't work all the time. So there has to be something out there to support them. And, we've explored different types of space stations and habitats in Star Trek before, including the novels, like the Vanguard station, which has, all these amenities for people who are stationed on it. So I'm thinking, this thing is bigger than Vanguard. It's got to have facilities to provide this sort of downtime, recreation, leisure activity. So what would it look like? And then you think about other shows like the Promenade on DS9. There's a lot of stuff that happens on the Promenade in DS9. Yeah. So I mean, and these people don't just sleep and do their jobs. They have lives outside of that. And like you said, the pace of the television show is such that you don't really get to see more than glimpses of that. So you don't really get to know the person in the uniform. except for the most basic traits and characteristics. So it's fun when the shows get to do it, and it's absolute fun for us because it just helps, it helps with the pacing. It helps introduce people. It gives you that pause between, bigger scenes or big plot developments. And I thought it was important to show them that way before we get into the craziness of the storyline.
Well, speaking of downtime and recreation, I loved the incorporation of movie night, which we saw in season 3 on Discovery. And here you get to have a little bit of fun with it and play with it and describe the plot of the movie that they're watching, which, we're reading this and like, oh, Galaxy Quest, cool. Yeah. Just the thought of Star Trek characters watching Galaxy Quest, that makes me very happy.
I think there's a world where that happens. There's a universe or a reality where that happened. There's also another reality where those adventures take place in the Star Trek world, but that's another topic for another day. It was fun to do that. I mean, and I had different takes on those scenes because there's one at the beginning and one at the very end of the book where I do that. And I got my original idea was shot down, whereas I wanted to describe a movie that was basically a dramatization of events that happened with Voyager and its crew.
Oh, that would have been fun.
But they thought that was too on the nose. And the only reason I even tried it was because, in another book that Christopher Bennett wrote, he talked about how the adventures of the Enterprise under Captain Kirk had been dramatized.
Right.
It's after the 5-year mission but it's after the motion picture, and Sulu and Uhura and Chekhov are talking about how, hey, can you believe this? They made a movie out of our stuff. They made a movie out of our missions. Can you believe this? And I always thought that was funny, and I was kind of jealous that I hadn't thought of it first. I was actually kind of mad at Christopher for a minute.
Well, even that, isn't that like kind of a pseudo reference to like Gene Roddenberry in the motion picture? Kind of had this like oblong reference to like Kirk being like, oh yeah, the Hollow novels or whatever you've watched of us we're exaggerating stuff, and like sort of like saying that the original series novel or episodes themselves were like kind of dramatizations, very vaguely.
I've always subscribed to the idea when people try to ask about how the novels fit with the shows and the movies. It's like, what you see on screen is what really happened, and what you read in novels and comics and other narratives it's sort of the equivalent of historical fiction, the way that they used to write books about Elliot Ness or Billy the Kid or other real life historical figures, or we still do that, so that's how I look at it. That's my rationalization for why things don't necessarily mesh all the time between shows and books.
Mm.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Keeps me sane, because if you try to fit it all together, it's just madness.
That's what I love about Star Trek, though.
Totally, yeah. There's like the historians in the far future arguing that the Diane Duane historical novels, people rely on them too much. That's not how it actually happened.
Right, exactly.
Love that. Oh my God.
You told me to read a book and it's wrong.
Some Starfleet professors like, oh God, those novels, they're trash.
Mm-hmm. I also really loved the relationship between Dr. Arbasala and Culber, because Culber's kind of been working to aid the mental health of the Discovery crew and stuff. And he kind of almost sees this as a bit of competition a little bit when Arbasala comes aboard, or maybe a comment on what he's doing isn't effective enough or something like that. I loved the progression through the novel of him kind of making peace and not seeing it as an attack eventually. But I love that because that felt really real to me, that kind of professional annoyance on his part, I guess.
Yeah, I never wanted to portray Arbasala as an adversary. I always wanted him to be an ally from the beginning. Now, it was never about competition. It was never about, you're not doing a good. As far as they were concerned, as far as Starfleet and Arbasala himself were concerned, it's not that Culber was not doing a good job. It was more like, how can we help him, because he's taken on this responsibility on top of everything else that he does, and who's watching out for him. Because he's spending so much energy and so much emotion on taking care, looking after his crew, that, he's forgetting to care for himself. He's forgetting he needs his own self-care. So that was always my intention. It was never meant to be adversarial. In fact, I was the inspiration for the character. If you've ever watched MASH, the television show, is Dr. Sidney Friedman, the therapist who pops up sporadically throughout the run of the show and plays a huge part in the finale. So that was my inspiration for the character. In fact, the actor's name who played Friedman on MASH is named Alan Arbus. So if all I did was flip the letters around a little bit to give him a nod. So yeah, from the beginning, that was my touchstone.
See, I kept reading his name, and because I'm an Expanse fan, I kept thinking of Avasarala.
Yeah.
Avasarala from the Expanse. So that's right. I was like, wait, who?
That's fair.
She would not make a good counselor.
No.
At all as a character.
I was going to say that would not work well.
No, she would be a terrible counselor. Great character, terrible.
Now Friedman was always he was always the guy that helped you. He helped you find your own way to connecting your dots or to filling in your blanks. He wasn't, like most therapists, he doesn't provide you the answers. He helps you find your way to your own answer. And so again, I was very sensitive to the idea that, I can't come off, I'm not a mental health expert. I have no idea how to do that other than for myself. So how do I make this person, somebody you want to root for, somebody you want to cheer on because he's doing right by our heroes. So it was an interesting little challenge.
I was just saying, I loved the moments where we got to see him sort of interacting with the different crew members and sort of like helping, as you were saying earlier, connecting the dots between where they were in season 3 and where they start in season 4. Like Indira dealing with their sort of being in like the middle of so many identities with Tal as the symbiote, and then also Gray being there. And I liked how you depicted that really well with like Gray appearing every now and then physically, or quote unquote physically, see them, and then also sort of like drawing upon different personalities for Indira as they sort of navigated everything. I thought that was and then having Abasarala, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, having him sort of like help them sort of connect the dots about finding yourself amongst all of those voices, I thought was a good beat. And that happened several times, both with our named characters and then with even like in engineering where he almost hurts himself, or does hurt himself helping random people. I thought was just, I liked those beats quite a lot. I thought they worked really well.
I appreciate that. I've always been fascinated by the Trill and their ability to tap into the experiences of their previous hosts. I've always thought that was a fascinating. It's like the Doctor, in Doctor Who. It's like they have their own personality and they're doing their own thing, but yet they have this wealth of knowledge and experience and emotion and pain and happiness and sorrow from all their previous lives that they can tap into. The Trill are basically as close as you're going to get to that for Star Trek. And Adira, they have no training or preparation or any sort of readiness to accept that responsibility, for lack of a better term, of caring for the Tal symbiont. So they've got a long road to go, and they tapped into that in the show, but there's just so much there. This is an ongoing thing, and that was one of the other messages about mental health that I had to remember. It's like mental health is not a one and done thing. It's not something that you finish. It's an ongoing process, and it's different for every individual, and you don't necessarily cure yourself. You learn how to incorporate it positively into your life rather than letting it, be negative or drag you in different, not great directions. I'm fumbling through this, but so that's my understanding of it. That's how I've come to appreciate it when I've had those conversations. And that's what I was trying to communicate. I'm not going to solve all the ills of the crew in this one book. That's impossible. It's insulting to even suggest that. So I just would hopefully we're on a path now and we'll move forward, and, we have each other to help us navigate the way.
Yeah, I really appreciated a lot of those scenes. The one that sticks out in my mind is when Arbasala is talking to Culber and makes him kind of realize the implicit trust that he has in Captain Burnham. Why can't he accept that the crew around him has that implicit trust in him as well? And I love that little, he's like, oh, I can't believe I didn't see that you were doing that. But yeah, that makes sense. And having been on kind of the receiving end of that kind of conversation before, I really appreciated that. I thought that was well done.
Thank you. Yeah. It's sort of good naturedly, not offensively taps into the whole idea that doctors make the worst patients. They're so busy devoting their energy and their time to caring for others. They kind of forget, that they're people too, and that they deserve the same grace.
As a person whose stepmom was a nurse practitioner, yes, accurate.
And also speaking of Adira, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I really appreciated how they were characterized in this novel, because the show doesn't seem to delve too much into their past lives very much. Like, a lot of the focus in the last season was, you know, their relationship with Gray and kind of things in the now. But I felt there were a number of times in this novel, and one in particular, where you really had them kind of tapping into those past lives and making it apparent that, you know, they are a very wise person because of all of this past experience, and something that maybe doesn't get shown or doesn't get illustrated on the show as effectively, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I see where you're coming. That's kind of what I was trying to tap into a little bit. I mean, on DS9, you know, Sisko has no problem listening to Jadzia Dax because he knows that inside Jadzia is his former friend and all the other previous Dax hosts, and he understands the Trill, at least, you know, to a degree anyway. He's at least familiar with them, and he understands what it means to be a Trill host, versus the Discovery crew who've never even heard of them,
right,
before they get there. So even though it's in my head, even though it was explained to them fairly recently, that's still a lot to take in and absorb and come to understand. I mean, it's a journey for Adira and the crew, that, wow, this person who's barely out of their teens is actually a wealth of knowledge that can be a tremendous, you know, help to us during future missions. Just the stuff that they've forgotten will be more than the Discovery crew knows. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's kind of sad that we won't get to see more of that on the show. You see some of that in season 5, but I know you guys haven't seen season 5 yet, but there's a little bit of that. But I'm like, wow, the potential there is just amazing. That's like I said, one of the things I love about the Trill is that they're just chock full of potential storytelling possibilities.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a really good lesson in there too of, you know, what you see isn't like your first impression, what you see in front of you isn't the entire truth. I feel like there's a lot of really good story potential there.
That's always a good lesson to remember and heed. You know, it's like looks can be deceiving, or don't trust first glance or first blush, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, we should get into the actual plot of the novel. We haven't really talked about that yet. And that is... The first thing is the use of the Xaheans, of whom we met, you know, Mihani Ika Halika Po in...
Man, don't ask me to say that.
I was going to say, I was going to attempt it myself. I'm like, you did it.
I practiced. I really like that character. So I kind of really enjoyed that character from day one. So yeah, we met her, of course, in Short Treks, and then later again in season 2 of Discovery, where she, you know, developed this strong bond with Tilly. And then now we're flash forwarding 1,000 years later. She was queen at the time, and now we see kind of her legacy, her impact, and not only that, but all of the kind of terrible things that have happened to these people and this culture in the intervening years. Where did the idea of using the Xaheans come from? Like, I feel like the idea probably came from, you wanted some link from the past to the future. Where did the Xahean idea come from?
It came out of discussions that I had with Kirsten Beyer when I was, you know, trying to figure out where the stakes were in the ground as far as where I could go and where I couldn't go, with, you know, revealing too much information while the show is still being produced. It was her idea to tap into the Xaheans, and in particular the relationship that Tilly had with Queen Poe. So once that seed was planted, then, you know, I came up with the backstory about how they fared, you know, in the years after Discovery disappeared, and, you know, adding in the part where the Dominion War and the Klingon War, and then of course the Cardassian occupation. You know, they basically just got crappy hands dealt to them, is what it comes down to. And then of course we have to tread lightly across the 25th century and beyond, because that area has not been mapped very well. So I had to kind of be a little vague about what happened to them. But the idea is that they were forced to leave their planet. So, you know, are they looking for a similar planet that can surrogate for that? Or are they just severing ties completely and going out? Or are they just trying to get away from everybody? Because, you know, screw everybody. we tried to be nice and everybody screwed us over. So we're going away and taking our toys with us. So there's a lot of all of that in play. Which is why you get the schism between the different factions of Xaheans about, you know, we want to keep our community together. This is what's left of our people. And, you know, people are like, we've been stuck in this ball for 100 years or 200 years. And some of us have been born here and we've never known anything else. And we would like to see what else is out there. And one of the things that I wanted to do was, you know, there's no right answer there's no wrong answer necessarily. Both positions are valid. I don't like mustache twirling villains. We've had that conversation before, Dan. It's like, the best antagonists think they're doing things for the right reasons, or noble reasons. So I wanted that areas of gray to be explored. And of course, here comes the Federation trying to solve a problem. Are they going to make it better or worse? Let's see what happens. So that was the initial setup. And then, it just kind of spiraled out from there.
Yeah, it was especially it was just touching on that backstory that we learned. It was really heartbreaking to hear, because it's with them in Discovery, how much of their backstory is reliant upon them having a relationship to their planet. So hearing what happened to that, I think, is like a very quick way to like make it be like, oh, that's horrible, especially knowing, making it akin to the Bajoran occupation with the Cardassians and how much that left scars across Bajor. And then to see that happening with another people who had an even more intrinsic tie to just the physical land that they were from was a really rough sort of thing to hear, and it came across really well in how Burnham and especially Tilly sort of reacted to that, and Tilly's sort of sense of like what she missed, and this like trying to make sense of her tie back to Poe, and getting to see. I loved like the little ties that you found with they would go out to dinner and they like the pudding or the ice cream or whatever it was that Tilly fed Poe has become like a dish there in Xahean culture. And so I just thought that this was like this interesting mix of emotions for someone like Tilly, being like understanding this tie that they have and what was lost, and her being able to bring that forward because she knew Poe, but then also seeing all the ways she influenced it and how they've also changed themselves. I thought it was an interesting sort of complex relationship that you sort of explored with the unique circumstances of Discovery's crew.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Discovery helps a lot because they have not been afraid to have their characters wear, their emotions on their sleeves. I think it's a great thing. I mean, because these people have, they're human, or, we're going to go with that for the purposes of conversation. They're human. They're people. They need the, the break. They need the diversion. They need to be heard when they're hurting. And, not every, and this is not just a Star Trek thing. This is every action hero ever. I mean, every action guy that you can think of has got to be suffering from some kind of post-traumatic stress at this point. Just think about Jack Bauer or the NCIS teams. Like, how are you guys not in therapy? That's the question.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see those explorations of the human side of these characters, to borrow a phrase. So that helps. And then, just Tilly's relationship in particular with Queen Poe was something I wanted to tap into. And of course, the pain she feels because she, for all I know, she's thinking if she'd stayed home, she would have been around and maybe been able to contribute to a possible solution. But it also makes her angry that apparently the Federation completely dropped the ball when it came to these people. There may or may not have been a parallel that I was trying to draw based on current events. We see a lot of that happen in the world today.
I wonder what you're referring to.
Yeah. I can't imagine what that could be. So that's, that was where I was coming from as far as that. And then, the hardest part about, it's funny, but the hardest part about portraying the Xaheans was having to come up with all those names and then having to provide pronunciations for all those names when it came time for the audiobook. They gave me a page of all the Xahean names, and I had a spreadsheet going of all the names so that I wouldn't like repeat patterns or anything. It was just like, wow, there's a lot of Xaheans in this book. What was I thinking?
I felt bad for I forget who the audio reader was, but she was doing it like a champ, but it was
January Lavoie was the reader for this one, and I'm glad that they picked her. I love Robert Petkoff, and I think he does a great job. But I think when the narrative is focused so much on Burnham, a different reader is more appropriate. And she had already provided that service for us with Una's Discovery novel, Wonderlands. So I was happy that she was available to do this again.
No, she did an absolutely great job. No, she and Robert Petkoff have been like trading off Star Trek novels, and they've both been really excellent.
They both seem to enjoy it, at least in the clips that I see, because they show sometimes a behind the scenes clip of them recording. And I don't know. I mean, it's a job, and they do very well at it. But I like to think that they're enjoying themselves while they do it. They seem to be in the clips that I've seen.
Yeah, I like that idea of what you were saying with Tilly. Like if she had been there, maybe some small influence, maybe something would have been different. And of course, that's related to the lives of each of the people as well. Like the parallels there between, what's happened to the Xahean culture and what's happened in the lives of the Discovery crew, and what might have been different had things gone differently, had they stayed with their families, etc. I think there's a lot there that's really interesting that plays on a lot of the feelings that these characters have. Putting yourself in the mindset of someone 1,000 years displaced from where they've come from, like I love Discovery, and I think they've done an amazing job of it. I don't understand how none of these people had to go to university for 10 more years after. But
I in my head there are these scenes that I never got to write, but I jotted them down as asides that it'd be funny if you could have like characters back and forth, like going through the historical records of or the databases on the ship. And they're like, can you believe all the stuff that happened when we were a cloud attacked Earth, and then this thing came and attacked the one to talk to the whales and the Borg and all this other stuff, and you just this giant jellyfish or whatever. I mean, there's all these things that happened, and that they didn't get to see, but they're thinking it has to be crazy. Nobody would believe this. A giant green hand grabbed the Enterprise. What's that about? I mean, there's all these things that I would love to have had them talking about in the bar, and let Jet Reno have all the commentary on how stupid some of that stuff sounds. That's not true. Pixar, it didn't happen. That kind of thing.
You can't break the warp 10 barrier. Why would we evolve into salamanders? I don't understand.
That doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Speaking of Jet Reno, you captured her tone so perfectly in this novel. And as I was reading it, thinking about, some of the things that I see you post on social media and stuff, I realize you're the perfect person to get Jet Reno's tone down in these books. I feel like that sarcasm and just that snappy comeback must be such a joy to write.
I had a lot of fun writing Jet Reno. That might have been my favorite character to write. And that's a close call, because I really enjoyed writing the different characters for different reasons. But I love Jet Reno. I don't think the world deserves Tig Notaro. And I think Tig Notaro makes anything better. And when they used her and CGI'd her into that zombie movie that they did on Netflix, Army of the Dead, I'm just like, they need to just CGI Tig Notaro into everything. Every movie will be better if she's in it. Go all the way back to the silence and just start going forward and put Tig in everything. Give her work until she's dead 20 years, but keep her going. That kind of thing. So I love her sense of humor. I love her perspective. I love her comedy. If you've ever watched any of her stand-up specials or any of her stand-up sets, I mean, she's just a riot.
The one where she talks about her mom as well was like in cancer, and also just like she managed to make like really dark stuff very, very funny and meaningful. She's fantastic. Yeah,
I think that comes from having endured it herself, and having endured it with her family. It gives you a perspective, and we all sometimes in our darkest moments we find something humorous somewhere, because it's sort of a defense mechanism, against just descending into the chaos or into the pit. And I know I've got a dark sense of humor, and I know I've got a gallows sense of humor that has pulled me through more than one tough time. So I can appreciate that. But yeah, writing for Jet Reno was an absolute treat. I had way too much fun, probably more than should be allowed by law.
Well, it definitely comes through. Like, anytime she has any kind of quip, I'm just grinning reading it, because the voice is there. Like it's like she's reading it off the page when I was reading it. And I didn't get I wasn't listening to the audiobook. I just read it written word, and it leaps off the page in her voice. I love it.
Oh, I was just going to say, January Lavoie did a fantastic Tig Notaro impression. I was like listening.
Awesome. I don't know if Tig Notaro will ever read or hear this, but I hope if she does, she'll think I did her justice. So I hope any of the characters will think I did them justice. I know that some of the actors are aware of the novels, and like I know that when Dave Gallanter's book came out, that Hugh Culber, Wilson Cruz and Anthony Rapp both made a point of thanking him for how they were portrayed in his book. So I know they're at least paying attention. I'm not expecting that kind of attention from them, but I hope if it does cross their paths for whatever reason, they think I did them justice.
I think you definitely did. So
one thing you mentioned earlier about real life things influencing what's happening in the novel, where that really jumped out for me as well was, so you talk about these two sides in Xahean society and the kind of clash between them. But at the same time, while this is going on, there are elements of the government that are sending in people who are instigating things that are
trying to escalate and incite things to make one side look to try to make them look bad.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, with things that we've seen with allegations that have made with things like Black Lives Matter movements and those getting out of control and who's really doing that and that sort of thing, and then the other side as well, making claims of other side doing that, yada, yada, back and forth. I'm assuming a lot of that was on your mind as you're writing this. How did that kind of figure into the plot of what's going on here?
Pretty much just what you said. It was definitely on my mind. You get these different protests and these movements and these incidents that occur, and some of it is born out of anger and some of it is born out of desperation, and others are there to egg on the chaos. And so where is that, who is doing it, where's the line of separation, what is the reasoning for it? All these are part of the conversation. When people were trying to equate January 6th to the Black Lives Matter protests and the George Floyd protests, it's like, no, those are two completely different, different things that are going on. Those are happening for different reasons. And so to equate them is, false. I'm not just, now my particular take on things is like, we all have the right to protest. We all have the right to peaceably assemble and to demand a redress of our grievances. But once we start getting into property damage and people getting hurt, you start to lose sympathy. But again, the context of what is happening and why is important. It's not just a simple, well, this guy did it and this guy did it, so they're the same. No, I'm afraid not. The dynamics are way more complicated than that. And you're actually doing a disservice to both sides of that equation when you say that. I'm not saying I agree with one over the other. But I think we all understand that I'm more sympathetic to one side than the other. I'm not real excited about people taking over the Capitol on January 6th, but it's not that simple. It's just there's so many factors in play that have to be taken into account if you want to have a serious conversation about either side of that equation. I tried to play with that a little bit, but I couldn't get too wrapped up in the storyline that I had.
The thing that resonated with me, because I have a slightly different take in terms of civility and it's if your property damage that, without getting into that whole argument because it's a whole other separate discussion. The thing that resonated with me though in this story particularly was how that that riots and people causing property damage is often used by those in power to then dismiss wholesale the conversation, which is no, it's you regardless of how you feel about that stuff, and we can have a whole other separate conversation about whether or not that stuff gets attention in the way that is helpful or not. You still need to listen to what people are actually saying, and people will sort of clutch their pearls a little bit and be like, oh, you didn't say it in the right way, therefore I can just wholesale say, oh, your side is absolutely wrong. And I liked that this story, especially from the character of the Discovery crew, was very much no, we're here to sort of listen and sort of see that there is there's people trying to express something important that those in power are actively dismissing. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the way you sort of set up this sort of political discourse in this novel. I thought that was a very thoughtful and insightful sort of take on it. So
thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that my limited command of the language sometimes doesn't quite have the nuance to get around, but I appreciated that characterization of, they're trying to escalate things in order to be able to just dismiss them and turn public sympathy against it and sentiment against it, which is definitely something that we've seen.
I mean, it can be anything from, lighting a police station on fire and trying to blame the other side, or, it could be just being angry that someone, kneels for the national anthem. It's you're not pausing to or coming up with a justification in your mind so that you can dismiss why they're doing that. It's like they're telling you flat out why they're doing it, and you're substituting your own version of facts for what that's coming out of their mouth. And if they had heard them the first time, they wouldn't feel compelled to make a scene. That's what a protest is a demand to be heard. So, yeah. And I mean, we've been watching this now for several years work out, where they've completely twisted the intent of a particular individual's actions or a group's actions so that they can dismiss it. Jesse's bang on when they say that. So, yes.
Well, one other thread that gets picked up, I think, between season 3 and 4 that I really appreciated you addressed was, the big moment in the season 3 finale where Burnham puts Stamets in the little personal escape pod and shoots him off, and in from Stamets' perspective, takes away his agency in that moment, that his ability to make the decision for himself there, for, understandable reasons and that sort of thing from both their sides. I love that you picked that up. And I remember coming back to season 4 thinking, like, we're not getting any kind of resolution on this. There was kind of the dirty look that Stamets gave Burnham at the end on the bridge in season 3. And then that's kind of it. I really like where these characters come to in this novel and how that kind of slowly evolves over the course of the story. It wasn't just, one thing is said and, it's done. Okay, cool. We're cool now. Talk a little bit about how they came to an accord here and how Stamets and Burnham kind of mended fences there, because I really like that aspect of the story.
That was one of the dynamics that I specifically cited when I was coming up with what I wanted to do with the book. I just thought it was weird that after all of that, and if you watch his face at the end of season 3 and that final scene where they're all standing, I mean, he's like shooting daggers at her, and, I love Anthony Rapp because he can convey so much with just a facial expression. But yet, season 4, that first time that they're interacting, there's no hint of this animosity. And, it's like, well, maybe he's just burying it deep or they've resolved it. I prefer to think that they buried the hatchet somewhere. And so I decided I was going to bury that hatchet if I could. What I wanted to do was demonstrate through her actions, again, in a different set of circumstances where he is once again the focal point of a threat, that where she's coming from when she did that in season 3. And then he realizes that, he's in captivity and they're looking for him. And he knows that she will not stop until she finds him. And she will do that for any member of the crew. And I think he finally realized that is what she was coming from the first time. It's her job to protect her crew. And, Stamets has always had this really standoffish relationship with Starfleet and rules and regulations. You saw how he butted heads with Lorca, during season 1, and even to a lesser degree, Saru and Burnham in season 2. But I just wanted him to kind of come to not a stark realization, just, as a consequence of the events, that, I'm really glad she's as dogged and determined as she is. Otherwise, my life is going to turn to crap here really quick. So I just wanted it to kind of grow naturally out of that set of circumstances that, he can come to respect where she's coming from. And they're both headstrong, they're both stubborn, they're both very passionate about their role. So I just wanted to make sure that they kind of approached it equitably.
I also kind of appreciate how it flips the situation around a little bit too, because again, we kind of have Stamets being used in a similar way that they were going to use him at the end of season 3, but this time he kind of gets the opportunity to do things his way and sets the trap for the bad guys, gives the back door and gives all those options, but is kind of left to do what he will to resolve the situation, while Burnham trusts him a little bit to kind of get out of that situation. It's kind of set up that way, but I liked that he has a little bit more kind of leeway to enact his plan, which works out really well. And they kind of use both of their strengths together to resolve the situation.
I didn't make it a conscious decision on her part. It was just like a gut call that she can, she expects Stamets to act in a certain way when presented with a certain situation, because she understands his personality and his stubbornness and his determination to do things his way. And like, well, okay, he's not going to let anybody use him if he has any say in the matter. So what would he do in this set of situation? And she's logical. She's also, her own upbringing allows her to approach problem solving a little bit differently than the average person. So she can connect some dots that that Kirk or even Picard might not necessarily consider. That was sort of like a Hail Mary, roll the dice. I trust my people and we'll see what happens. And of course it works out, because it always works out. It's Star Trek. But I wanted to at least have them both earn it a little bit,
Yeah, for sure.
No, it was right. Yeah.
I also, speaking also of getting the characters' tones right and stuff, I totally just saw like Anthony Rapp as Stamets, that little smirk on his face at the end when he's like, no, actually, the spore jump was never going to work. And they kind of look at him, what? And he's like,
I did like that. He's like, yeah, no, maybe someday, not today.
But not today, yeah. But yeah, I can I was trying to picture how he might play that scene. It's like, nah, not today. Nah, maybe not ever, but definitely not today.
No. I was kind of, the image that came to my mind was the end of the episode Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, when Mud realizes they've got the drop on him, and he's like, yeah, that was me. I love that.
I think the stakes were a little higher, I think, but I mean, I wanted to show that he was fascinated by the engineering problem that was presented to him. Like he really wanted to solve the problem, but he didn't want to do it on their terms, So even at the end of the book, we're still talking about how he's going to continue these experiments and maybe find a way to get them what they want. But we're going to do it the right way. We're not going to cajole or threaten people into helping you. We're going to work together the way the Federation is supposed to do things. So it helps to mend that. It helps begin the process of mending that relationship with the Xaheans. So yeah, I just love the fact that he, deep in the back of his brain, he's working the problem. But he knows he doesn't have what he needs to fix it today, but he's got enough to bluff his way until hopefully Burnham and crew show up to save him.
I also kind of appreciated how at the end, like, it's not all solved in a nice big bow, but it's like, we're going to work on this and we're going to, that thematically just, I think, works really well with, the mental health issues and stuff, as well as the real world issues with Sanctuary and the Xaheans. I really liked that decision to kind of leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. That was a deliberate choice. Because going back to what we said earlier, these are not problems that you fix quickly or if at all. You learn to manage them. You learn to live with them. And I didn't think that a quick fix for the Xaheans was appropriate given the rest of the elements in the book with the mental health aspects. So it's a beginning. It's a beginning of a renewed relationship with the Xaheans, and it's a beginning for Discovery's crew as they finally figure out, okay, we can thrive here. We can find our place in this new world. That was where I wanted to leave things. And
I really liked for me, I think that it all came together most in the two scenes at the end where we go and visit Xahea, and I think it's Tilly that says we could terraform it, and they're like, no, this is what it is. We don't want to change this because it's not going to be our planet anymore, our sister, as I said. But then you also get that right next to the scene where we get a message from Poe to Tilly and Burnham that is very sweet and showcase like there was positivity and happiness and life that happened in between those years as well. And it pointed to me about like there are, you can look back and be like, oh man, all this horrible stuff happened, but then there's these ups and downs of life, both on a cultural level, but also in an individual's life as well. And I thought that was a very sort of really nice way to end this story, where it's like acknowledging that there's good and there's bad, and the bad can be absolutely horrible, but then you can keep moving forward and hope to create something new even out of all of that stuff, and that there's still, something joyful within all of that. I thought that was like a good juxtaposition between those two moments of looking at the past of Xahea through those characters.
Thank you. I mean, that's life though. I mean, that's every day. We have tremendous happiness and we have a horrible tragedy that we all deal with. And sometimes it happens within the course of an hour. You can have, the happiest day of your life and the worst day of your life, but we persevere one way or the other.
I have to say, I really enjoyed this novel. I thought it was just a great it really struck the tone of Star Trek Discovery very, very well, a show that I adore. So I absolutely loved it. And I thought, like Jessie said, really great Star Trek message in it with that swelling of hope at the end, which a really good Star Trek story does. So thank you for this novel. I appreciate it.
I very much echo those sentiments. I really enjoyed this book, especially as a Discovery novel that takes place, like, that, again, feels like it's a full, complete episode of the show in a way that, again, love the other Star Trek novels, but the other Star Trek novels really haven't gotten, or Discovery novels specifically, I should say, haven't really had the chance to do. So this is a really fun novel to read in that aspect as well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
One other quick question. Sanctuary, that's basically Yorktown Station, right?
I was thinking that too. Okay, I'm glad it wasn't just me.
It was inspired by Yorktown. And in fact, I even obliquely mention it in the narrative. I try to hang a lampshade on it that Detmer said she saw plans for something like this, and don't know if it ever happened or not, because we don't know if there was a station like that in the prime timeline, but I choose to believe there's got to be something like that out there somewhere. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's also inspired by, there are a number of science fiction stories that depict these artificial habitats like that, like Cities in Flight or Elysium or things like that. It's just like, I just wanted something massive that they would build themselves with their own technology. And they've decided that this is home because we don't have our sister anymore. But obviously, not a perfect solution. So, but what is?
My touch was like Yorktown and the Citadel from Mass Effect was sort of the, yeah. I
mean, I tried to not. I didn't have any idea. I didn't have any expectations that people would go, nah, he couldn't have possibly meant that. No, I expected you to make that comparison, which is why I called it out in the book itself. It's like, yeah, absolutely.
No. And then the null gravity area in the center as well. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Where Idris Elba's flying around.
Yeah.
But it's also like the Dyson sphere, right, where everything is on the outer edge. It's like, well, there's only so many ways that something like that can work. A construct of that type can work. So, and keep it grounded in something that looks like Star Trek science, Star Trek science. We're going to use air quotes around that term.
Science.
Science.
So before we go, and I know this is kind of a question that I'm dreading asking, and I'm sure you're dreading being asked. Star Trek novels. We've talked about how there haven't been many on the schedule in the past, and as of right now, from Simon & Schuster, none on the schedule looking forward. What's the story? What's going on? Are there Star Trek novels being planned, thought about?
Yes, there are Star Trek novels that will come. It's a complicated conversation that involves things way above my pay grade, but I am fully confident that we will hear about Star Trek novels sooner rather than later. There's been Star Trek novels since the original series was on TV. So I kind of doubt that we're not going to have any more. That's crazy to even think about. But no, I understand, and I wish that there was a more concrete answer that I could provide, other than just say, keep your chin up. Things are in motion. Just because things aren't publicly known doesn't mean that there's nothing happening.
I need to know now. I need to always know right now.
I mean, it's weird. I don't, and like I said, there's a lot of wheels that are spinning that are way above me. And I'm just a contracted tie-in writer. I go where they point me. But yeah, the idea of there not being any more Star Trek novels is too terrible to contemplate.
Hear.
Patience, my friends.
All right. Okay. Well,
hopefully sooner rather than later.
Well, hopefully that answers the questions of a few people who have been sending stuff to my email inbox. Like I know even less than anybody else, so I don't know why they're asking me, but hopefully that sets people's minds at ease a little bit. As for you, what have you got kind of on the go working on that our listeners could kind of look to if they want to see more of your stuff?
Well, Kevin and I have been busy writing short stories for various anthologies. We had one come out in the spring that was kind of a weird Western that was in an anthology called High Noon on Proxima B, where all the stories are sort of space Westerns. So like Firefly or things like that. I just had a short story appear in an anthology that was just published last week or a week ago called Double Trouble, which is our Two-Fisted Team-Ups, which is basically a bunch of tie-in writers took a bunch of public domain characters from literature and comics and even real history and put two of them together so that they could tell a new story. So I took from my story, I took two characters from 1940s era comic books that have fallen into the public domain, and I created a new story with them. But there's things like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Marion from the Robin Hood story meets Annie Oakley. I mean, there's all kinds of weird team-ups that are happening there. The Brain That Wouldn't Die meets The Night of the Living Dead. There's all these, which are two films that are fallen into the public domain. So it's an interesting anthology. It's actually published by the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, which is a professional organization that I'm a part of that tries to get the word out about tie-in writing and its oft misunderstood nature within the larger realm of publishing. So it just came out. It was a Kickstarter thing that was very successful, and it's available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble if you're interested in looking it up. Let's see. Kevin and I also have short stories coming out in two other anthologies that'll be out later this summer. And then we also have a book about Iron Man. It's sort of a deconstruction of Tony Stark that will be out from Ben Bella Books in November. And then I'm working on a couple of projects right now that I can't talk about because they haven't been announced yet.
Fair enough.
Such is the life of a contracted writer or freelance writer.
Well, when you are able to say anything about those, where can people find you online to hear about them?
As always, you can find me at DaytonWard.com. That is sort of a landing page that will take you to a blog and my Facebook links to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all the other ones that have popped up since Twitter started melting last fall. So it was a Blue Sky, Mastodon, Hive. The only one I'm not on is Truth Social, at least not under my own name.
That's probably for the best. Yeah,
I maintain a presence there just for comedic value more than anything else. But yeah, so I'm out there. My one-stop shopping for internet banality is at DaytonWard.com.
Awesome. And Jessie, just a quick question. How's the movie coming?
It is coming great. We are filming in 2 months. We have been getting all our, basically it's been a lot of like production stuff. So my life is meetings upon meetings upon meetings. So this is like a 4-hour list video or 4-hour meeting about a shot list yesterday, which was fun. But yeah, no, we're starting to work with the cast in the coming weeks, so it's been kind of wild trying to figure all that out. We've announced officially John Delancey is a part of the cast, so for Trekkies, John Delancey is going to be in it. He's been interesting to work with and a lot of fun, but also like he is very wonderful. He was very sweet, but it was also like, oh, I'm on a phone call with Q talking about my script. That's a wild experience. But also we have wonderful people like Jessica Nicole, who's been in Fringe, Abigail Thorne of Philosophy Tube, who is also a really brilliant actor. She's wonderful, and a lot of also queer and trans folks in the story. So it is just for listeners who have not heard of it, it's called Identities. It is a sci-fi, what I'm calling hopeful dystopian story about how self-actualizing and being your full self allows you to destroy these systems of people that have very limited imaginations about what humanity can be. And I think it's like I said, hopeful dystopian story that will be coming on Nebula, which is a streaming service that I am a creator on. So go subscribe to Nebula. Hopefully with, if you go to nebula.tv/identities, you'll be able to sign up there, and that'll let them know, hey, this is, I want to sign up for funding Jessie's film. And then hopefully I can tell more, because the hope is that this is like a pilot episode in a series.
Ooh,
so
awesome.
See how it all shakes out. So
that sounds pretty ambitious.
It's going great. We'll see how it goes, but I'm very excited about it, and it's a lot of fun. And at the end of the day, even if nothing else, even if I just get to make this and no one watches it, I think it's been a very wonderful and amazing experience with all the people that I've worked with, both in the cast and the crew. And we've worked very hard to have a very inclusive and diverse team everywhere, because that's what Star Trek has always taught me, is that it's about allowing everyone to have a voice in creating wonderful, beautiful things. So yeah, I'm very excited about it.
Very cool. Well, we'll definitely keep our listeners updated and as we get closer to when that comes out. And where can people follow you online?
You can just follow me at Jessie Gender on YouTube primarily. That's where I do my video essay type of stuff. So that'll keep keep you up to date on everything going on with me and get you cool, weird stuff. Got a big Star Wars video coming out next month. That'll be a lot of fun. We're doing like animation style stuff with that. Like we're doing like a Tartarovsky sort of Clone Wars kind of vibe with it. It should be really fun to do that. So be on the lookout for that, and on Twitter and Instagram technically, and all those other ones as well, Blue Sky, whatever. I don't really post as much on there, but yeah, YouTube is probably the best place. So.
Awesome. You can find us at Positively Trek on Twitter and all those other places as well. PositivelyTrek@gmail.com if you'd like to reach out, and of course the Positively Trek discussion group on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this novel? We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you all so much for listening. We will see you in the next episode. And until then, as always, stay positive.